In 1874, one of America's most influential theologians asked a question that still echoes through our debates today. What is Darwinism? His answer was sharp, clear, and controversial. It is atheism. But Charles Hodge wasn't rejecting science. He was making a careful philosophical distinction that many people miss even now. Charles Hodge was a professor at Princeton Theological Seminary for over 50 years. He wasn't some backwoods preacher railing against progress. He was a scholar who read German theology in the original language, corresponded with scientists, and taught systematic theology to generations of Presbyterian ministers. When Darwin's Origin of Species was published in 1859, Hodge didn't immediately attack it. He waited 15 years, reading, thinking, and watching how Darwin's theory was being used. By 1874, he was ready to respond. Hodge's book begins with a question: what exactly is Darwinism? This might seem obvious, but Hodge recognized that people were using the word to mean very different things. Some meant simply that species change over time. Others meant that all life descended from common ancestors. Still others meant that this entire process happened without any divine guidance or purpose. Hodge insisted we must be precise. The theory of evolution, he argued, is not the same thing as Darwin's philosophy of Darwinism. Here's where Hodge makes his crucial distinction. He acknowledges that species might change. The Earth might be far older than many Christians thought. God might have created through secondary causes rather than immediate acts of creation. These were scientific questions, and Hodge was willing to let the evidence lead where it would. But Darwinism, as Darwin himself presented it, claimed something more: that the entire process of development happened through random variation and natural selection, without any design or purpose. That philosophical claim, Hodge insisted, is what makes Darwinism atheistic. The heart of Hodge's argument is about teleology, about purpose and design. For centuries, Christians and even non-Christian philosophers had looked at the intricate adaptation of living things and seen evidence of intelligent design. The eye perfectly suited for seeing, the wing perfectly suited for flight, the heart perfectly suited for pumping blood. Darwin offered an alternative explanation. These features arose through countless tiny variations, most of which failed, with only the successful ones surviving. There was no plan, no purpose, no designer guiding the process. It was all blind chance plus natural selection. Hodge actually read Darwin carefully, quoting extensively from his works. He noticed that Darwin himself sometimes seemed to waver on the design question. In early editions of Origin of Species, Darwin acknowledged the grandeur of a view in which life was breathed into a few forms or into one by the Creator. But in later writings, Darwin became more explicit. The appearance of design was exactly that, just appearance. There was no actual design, no mind behind the process, no purpose in nature. Hodge appreciated Darwin's scientific observations about variation and selection. What he rejected was the philosophical conclusion that these mechanisms eliminated the need for a designer. Hodge engaged seriously with the scientific evidence Darwin presented. He discussed the fossil record, geological time, comparative anatomy, and embryology. He acknowledged areas where Darwin's observations seemed compelling, but he also pointed out gaps in the evidence. Where were the countless transitional forms the theory predicted? How could complex organs like the eye arise through tiny, gradual steps, when the intermediate forms would be useless? How did life arise from non-life in the first place? These weren't just theological objections. They were scientific questions that Darwin himself admitted were difficulties for his theory. But Hodge's main point wasn't about scientific evidence. It was about the philosophical assumptions built into Darwinism. Darwin's theory, as a complete system, rested on two key claims. First, that random variation provided the raw material for evolution. Second, that natural selection was sufficient to explain all the complexity and adaptation we see in nature. Both claims, Hodge argued, denied design. If variations are truly random, they aren't guided by any intelligence. If natural selection is sufficient, no designer is necessary. Put those together, and you have a system that explicitly excludes God from the process of creation. Hodge wasn't just attacking. He offered his own view of how God might work in creation. God could work through secondary causes. God could use natural laws as instruments of divine purpose. The key difference was intentionality. In Hodge's view, whatever process God used to create life, it was guided by divine wisdom toward divine purposes. The variations weren't random, they were providentially directed. Natural selection wasn't the ultimate explanation. It was a tool in the Creator's hand. This left room for real science, real investigation of natural processes, while maintaining that nature itself revealed the mind of God. So why did Hodge call Darwinism atheism? Not because Darwin himself was necessarily an atheist, though Darwin had indeed lost his Christian faith, and not because everyone who accepted evolution was an atheist. Hodge knew Christian scientists who tried to reconcile evolution with faith. He called Darwinism atheism because, as a philosophical system, it denied design in nature. And if there's no design in nature, there's no evidence in nature for a designer. Darwinism made God unnecessary for explaining the origin and diversity of life. That, Hodge insisted, was functionally atheistic, even if individual Darwinists still believed in God for other reasons. Hodge saw that this wasn't just about biology. If random, unguided processes could explain the complexity of life, what about the complexity of human consciousness, morality, and reason? If our minds are just the products of evolutionary processes shaped by survival rather than truth, can we trust our reasoning? If morality is just evolved behavior that helped our ancestors survive, is there any objective right and wrong? Hodge worried that Darwinism, if fully embraced, would undermine not just theology but philosophy, ethics, and even science itself. After all, science depends on the reliability of human reason, which Darwinism seemed to call into question. Hodge's book provoked strong reactions. Some Christians thought he was too harsh, that he was creating an unnecessary conflict between science and faith. Some scientists thought he was simply wrong about the science, that the evidence for evolution was stronger than he admitted. But others appreciated his careful distinction between evolution as a scientific theory and Darwinism as a philosophical worldview. Even some who disagreed with his conclusions acknowledged that he had identified a real issue. Does evolution require us to abandon the idea of design and purpose in nature? More than 150 years later, Hodge's central question remains relevant. The debate has shifted and evolved, but we're still asking, what counts as science and what counts as philosophy? Can we accept evolutionary processes while maintaining that nature reveals design? Or does Darwin's mechanism really eliminate the need for a designer? Modern discussions of intelligent design, theistic evolution, and the relationship between science and faith still echo the distinctions Hodge made. He helped frame a conversation that continues today, forcing both scientists and theologians to be clear about what they are claiming and why. At the deepest level, Hodge's book is about how we read the world. Do we see nature as a text that reveals its author? Or do we see it as a purposeless process that arose by chance? This isn't ultimately a question science can answer, because it's a question about the limits and nature of science itself. Can purely natural explanations ever be complete, or do they always point beyond themselves to something more? Hodge believed that when we truly study nature, we encounter the wisdom and power of the God who made it. Darwinism, as he understood it, taught us to see nature as self-explanatory, requiring no reference to anything beyond itself. What can we learn from Hodge today? First, the importance of careful definitions. When we argue about evolution, are we talking about the same thing? Second, the difference between scientific evidence and philosophical interpretation. We can debate the evidence, but we should recognize when we've moved from science to philosophy. Third, the reminder that design and purpose matter. We're not just arguing about biology. We're asking whether the universe is meaningful, whether our lives have purpose, whether there's wisdom and intention behind existence itself. Charles Hodge asked, "What is Darwinism?" His answer challenged both his own generation and ours to think carefully about what we mean by evolution, what counts as explanation, and whether the natural world points beyond itself to its creator. The conversation he began continues, and his careful distinctions still have something to teach us.